The last customer had barely disappeared around the corner when 22-year-old Alara Voss heard the sound that made her heart stop, the metal handle of the store door being violently shaken from outside. It was after closing time on a bright Saturday afternoon, and the neighborhood market should have been empty. Alara had already counted the register twice, wiped down the counter, and turned off most of the lights. She was alone at the front of the store, or at least she thought she was. Outside, 3 rough-looking men stood near the entrance, laughing as they stared through the glass at her. What Alara didn't know was that in the back storage area, several members of a traveling motorcycle club were quietly waiting for the rain to pass before leaving. They had heard everything. And the men outside had absolutely no idea who was still inside. Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support helps stories like this reach more people. Alara had never imagined that an ordinary job at a neighborhood grocery store would become the place where she learned just how quickly fear could turn into courage. She had taken the cashier position 6 months earlier after her mother became ill and the family bills began piling up. Alara was quiet, responsible, and the kind of young woman who remembered customers' names and often helped elderly shoppers carry their bags to their cars. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking for attention. She simply wanted to finish her shift, collect her paycheck, and get home before her younger brother started worrying. That afternoon had been unusually busy. The store sat beside a long highway that connected several small towns, and on weekends it attracted travelers, families, truck drivers, and motorcyclists. A group of bikers had arrived around lunchtime. They were not the loud, reckless group people sometimes imagined when they heard the word bikers. They were members of a riding club called the Iron Pines, mostly middle-aged men and women who traveled together, volunteered at roadside charities, and stopped at small businesses whenever they passed through town. Their leader, a broad-shouldered 48-year-old man named Darius Kane, had noticed Alara helping an elderly customer reach a bottle from a high shelf. He remembered her kindness, but he never imagined that he would soon have a reason to return it. Around closing time, heavy clouds gathered over the highway. The bikers decided to wait inside the store's covered rear loading area until the weather cleared. The manager gave them permission to stay for a little while, and they moved quietly toward the storage section. Alara didn't know they were there. She was too busy finishing the closing routine. Then came the shaking door. Alara froze. 3 men stood outside. Their clothes were dusty, their voices loud, and their expressions carried the confidence of people who believed nobody would challenge them. One of them pointed toward the clock and laughed. Another cupped his hands around his eyes and stared through the glass. Alara slowly reached for the phone beneath the counter. The store's lights were already dimmed, but daylight still poured through the front windows. She could see everything clearly. The tallest man knocked again, harder this time. Alara didn't open the door. She knew the store was closed. The men began shouting through the glass, demanding that she come outside. Alara stepped backward and tried to keep her breathing steady. She reminded herself that the door was locked. She reminded herself that the manager had told her never to open it after closing. But fear has a way of making even a locked door feel fragile. One of the men walked around the side of the building. Alara's hands trembled. Then she heard a noise behind her. She turned sharply. Darius Kane stepped out from the storage hallway. For a second, Alara simply stared at him. Behind Darius came 6 other bikers. Their helmets were under their arms, and their expressions had completely changed. They had heard the shouting. They had heard the pounding on the door. More importantly, they had seen the fear on Alara's face. Darius didn't rush toward the front door. He calmly asked Alara to stay behind the counter while the group moved together toward the visible part of the store. Their presence alone changed the atmosphere. The men outside looked through the glass and suddenly realized they weren't dealing with one frightened cashier anymore. They were looking at a group of adults standing together. The tallest man stopped smiling. Darius opened the inner security door but kept the main entrance locked. He told the men outside that the store was closed and that they needed to leave the property. His voice was calm, firm, and controlled. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the men shouted that they weren't afraid of anyone. Darius didn't respond with anger. Instead, he calmly told another biker to contact local authorities and report exactly what was happening. Another biker stood beside Alara, making sure she didn't have to face the situation alone. The three men looked at one another. Their confidence began disappearing. They had expected a young cashier working alone. They had not expected witnesses. They had not expected cameras. And they certainly hadn't expected a group of responsible adults who refused to be intimidated. The men finally walked away from the entrance, but they didn't leave immediately. They lingered across the parking lot, talking among themselves. Alara remained behind the counter, still shaking. Darius noticed. He didn't tell her to calm down. He didn't tell her she was overreacting. Instead, he reminded her that being frightened in a situation like that was completely understandable. He told her that asking for help wasn't weakness. Those simple words broke something inside Alara. For months, she had been trying to be strong for everyone. Strong for her mother. Strong for her younger brother. Strong at work. Strong when bills arrived. Strong when exhaustion kept her awake. But standing there with tears gathering in her eyes, she realized she didn't have to carry everything alone. The authorities arrived a short time later and spoke with the store manager and witnesses. The bikers explained what they had seen without exaggeration. Security footage was reviewed, and the men were warned to stay away from the property. Once everything was settled, the bikers prepared to leave. Alara expected them to simply put on their helmets and disappear down the highway. Instead, Darius walked back toward the counter. He placed a small paper bag on it. Inside was a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a handwritten note from one of the bikers. Alara looked confused. Darius explained that during the earlier rush, they had noticed she hadn't taken a proper break. They wanted her to eat something before going home. It was such a small gesture. But to Alara, it felt enormous. She had spent so long believing that kindness was something she gave to other people. That afternoon taught her something different. Sometimes kindness comes back when you least expect it. The bikers eventually left the store, their motorcycles rumbling into the clear afternoon air. Alara stood near the window and watched them disappear down the highway. But the story didn't end there. The following week, Darius returned. This time he wasn't alone. Several members of the Iron Pines arrived with boxes of groceries for Alara's family. They had learned that her mother was struggling and that Alara had been working extra hours to help cover expenses. They didn't ask for anything in return. They simply said that everyone deserves someone to stand beside them when life becomes difficult. Alara tried to refuse at first. But Darius reminded her of the sandwich. He told her that sometimes accepting kindness was just as important as giving it. Alara finally accepted. Weeks passed. The incident gradually became a memory, but it changed Alara in ways she never expected. She became more confident at work. She began encouraging other young employees to speak up when they felt uncomfortable. The store manager improved the closing procedures and made sure no employee was ever left without a safe way to contact help. And the Iron Pines kept stopping by whenever they passed through town. Eventually, Alara became friends with several members of the group. She discovered that beneath their leather jackets and motorcycles were teachers, mechanics, nurses, parents, grandparents, and volunteers who spent their free time helping people along the highway. One afternoon, nearly a year after that frightening day, Alara stood outside the store watching a new cashier lock the front doors. The young employee looked nervous. Alara smiled and told her something Darius had once told her: courage doesn't mean never being afraid. Sometimes courage simply means knowing when to ask someone to stand beside you. That evening, Alara looked down the highway as motorcycles appeared in the distance. She smiled. The bikers had never realized that the night they protected a frightened cashier, they were giving her something far more valuable than safety. They were reminding her that the world still contained good people. And Alara, who had spent so long believing she had to face everything alone, finally understood one beautiful truth: sometimes the people who arrive unexpectedly become the people who change your life forever. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support can help this message reach someone who may need it today. And before the story ends, comment, "Kindness comes back," if you believe that even one small act of kindness can change someone's life. Because sometimes, the strongest protection isn't found behind a locked door. Sometimes, it comes from people who simply decide they won't let someone face fear alone. And sometimes, the strangers who stand beside you for one difficult moment become the reason you never feel alone again.